government just release the report so Canadians can decide?
The Honourable House Leader for the Government.
Mr. Speaker, math is really not the long suit of the party over there. The PBO has specifically said and repeated time after time, you would think they'd understand that 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off under the price on pollution than in the affected provinces. The fact is, though, Mr. Speaker, they talk of gag orders. We haven't seen the member for Peace River Westlock in a long, long time. And what about the former chair of the Status of Women Committee? We haven't seen her either. They are not anytime going to give less.
Just need to remind individuals we can't say whether someone's here or not, so just to be careful on those lines. The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Apparently answering questions doesn't seem to be this minister's long suit, Mr. Speaker. Their responses here are completely ridiculous. They claim that this report exonerates their position, but they won't release it. This is a little bit like someone who's accused of a crime walking into court saying they have an amazing alibi that proves that they're innocent, but they just can't show it to anybody. Here's the thing, Mr. Speaker, if you won't show your evidence to the jury, you're probably guilty. Why not do the easy thing, release the report, remove the gag order so Canadians can decide?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by wishing a happy World Environment Day to all Canadians, especially to the failed former leader of the Conservative Party, the member from Regina Capel, and the new leader of the Conservative Party from Carleton, who have voted against the environment over 400 times in this House of Commons, Mr. Speaker. It's clear where they stand on climate change, and it's clear where they stand on environmental protections. But Conservatives continue to mislead Canadians. Our government will continue to support the good work of the PBO, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry that Conservative math just isn't adding up these days.
The Honourable Member for Haldimand-Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that the Liberal carbon tax increases the cost of everything while failing to bring down emissions. The Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed that Canadians are paying more than they're getting back from this so-called rebate. The Liberals are clearly afraid that Canadians will know the truth, and that is that the carbon tax has made life unaffordable.
That's right.
When will this government stop the cover-up, release the report, and confirm what we all know, that Canadians are suffering because of this carbon tax?
Because of Trudeau. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the Conservatives are finally asking a couple of questions that are at least in the neighbourhood of the economy. The next step for them is to recognize how significant today is. Today is the day that Canada, first among the G7, lowered interest rates. It's the first time rates have gone down since COVID hit. This is a tremendously important day for Canada, and it is our responsible economic plan that has made it possible.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Well, Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Prime Minister will finally meet François Legault about immigration. It's high time. For months, he hasn't been doing anything about Quebec's influx of new arrivals. Monday needs to be a turning point. The federal government needs to do something. Quebec has been asking for temporary immigration to be reduced and that French requirements be brought into federal programs. It's also asking for asylum claims to be shared fairly, and it's asking for a reimbursement of $1 billion. So, on Monday, will the Prime Minister finally sign the check on Monday? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Bloc Québécois wants to speed up the processing of asylum claims, but what's really hypocritical is that they're getting up at the Finance Committee to oppose our reforms, which would do exactly that, speed up asylum claims processing. I know that the Premier of Quebec thinks the Bloc Québécois is useless. I don't share that opinion, but I'm starting to lose my convictions in that regard. Well, Mr. Speaker, if the federal government thinks that $1 billion is too much, it could have done something about asylum claims before It could also have reduced that bill by doing its job, especially on work permits. According to Quebec, asylum claims represent 20% of people on welfare, not because they don't want to work, but because they're not allowed to do so. Minister Fréchette has confirmed that on average they have to wait for work permits for 10 to 11 months. That's what Minister Fréchette said. When will Ottawa stop keeping these people in a life of poverty? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the entire opposition opposed our reforms on asylum, which would have sped things up. I find it ridiculous. They should admit what they're doing. We've talked about dark and light blue, and as for Monday's meeting, they'll have to wait until Monday.
Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the Liberals are trying to hide what Canadians already know, that it's a carbon tax is a costly scheme that is making everything more expensive. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has already proven that the vast majority of Canadians are worse off economically because of this failed scheme. What we didn't know is that the government actually went out and did their own economic analysis of the carbon tax, but they're refusing to release it. Why the cover-up?
Here, here. Why? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite should be careful what he asks for, but I will reiterate for the benefit of this House that 8 out of 10 Canadians are better off today than they were before because of the price on pollution. And as a bonus on this World Environment Day, Mr. Speaker, the environment and climate change, we make our contributions to achieving our targets, and we can do Canada's part, as I know all Canadians want to do, in combating climate change.
Bravo.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, all we're asking for is that report to be released so Canadians can see the results, because it's Canadians who are the ones that are paying for this expensive, failed Liberal scheme. So when the government goes through the trouble of putting together a report and doing the analysis, but keeps that report a secret and doesn't even allow the Parliamentary Budget Officer to talk about it, you have to wonder, how bad is it, Mr. Speaker? When will they end the cover-up and release that report?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And unfortunately for the Conservatives, that's just not what the PBO has said. The Parliamentary Budget Officer issued a report about a month and a half ago saying that he accidentally overestimated the economic impact of the carbon price on Canadians, Mr. Speaker. I would like to re-emphasize for Canadians that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back through the Canada Carbon Rebate than they pay in the price on pollution, Mr. Speaker. And as a reminder, the next payment of the Canada Carbon Rebate will go out on July 15th in the summer. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are hiding the truth from Canadians. The Environment Minister is refusing to release a secret government report that proves the carbon tax is costing Canadians more than they get back. In fact, the Liberals have placed a gag order on their own budget watchdog, blocking him from speaking about this damning report. Canadians already know the carbon tax is a complete scam. So when will this Liberal minister release his secret report and end his carbon tax cover-up?
The Honourable Minister of Rural Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, I'd like to remind the member opposite that thankfully we all passed the fez last week, and that means in his riding in Manitoba, a family of 4 is going to receive $1,440 with the rural top-up. In my riding in Newfoundland and Labrador, it's $1,430. In Alberta, it's $2,160. Because no matter how you do the math, Mr. Speaker, 8 out of 10 families are better off with the carbon rebate, especially families in rural. They've got that top-up.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Liberal government, life is so expensive, and Quebecers are paying the price. Once again this week, the Bloc Liberal coalition voted against suspending the federal gas tax, which would have given Canadians a break, and the Bloc Québécois wants to radically increase taxes. The Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed this week at the Finance Committee that the government has a secret report which will prove that the carbon tax has fiscal repercussions. When will the minister publish this report, which proves that the Conservatives and Canadians are right? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is ridiculous. 8 out of 10 families get more back from the carbon rebate than they pay, where it applies. It's that simple. This carbon pricing revenue is redistributed among families. Wealthy families pay more than they receive, but middle class and lower income families receive more than they pay. It's just that simple. 8 out of 10 families receive more money in their pockets. Those are middle class and lower income families.
In 2011, the Conservatives changed the food mail program that went from helping people in the North to subsidizing rich corporations in the South. Everyone knows it is not working, but the Liberals refuse to reform it. The Northwest Company and the CEO makes millions in profits and bonuses, but people in the North cannot afford to eat. When will the Liberals finally reform the Conservatives' broken Nutrition North program so it helps people to afford healthy food?
The Honourable Minister, Northern Affairs.
I thank the Honourable Member for her very important question. We know that the affordability of food, nutrition is so important in the North. We are committed 100% that 100% of the retail subsidy will go to Northerners. We are currently doing an internal review of Nutrition North. Once that's done, we will do an external audit. We are committed that 100% of the retail benefit will go to Northerners.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, families in Nanaimo Ladysmith are struggling to keep up with rising food prices. Yet the Liberals have done nothing to lower the costs, and the Conservatives would rather protect CEO profits. The NDP is giving them a chance today to help Canadians. They can either support our motion to cap the cost of essential foods or keep protecting CEO profits while families go hungry. Which will they choose?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I agree with my colleague that food prices is difficult for many families across this country, but they got a bit of good news today, Mr. Speaker. 4.75 is the numbers that Canadians will remember. But if the member really wants to help, she should ask all the members, especially on the opposition, to support us in pushing Walmart and Costco to adopt the Grocery Code of Conduct, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we have been pushing for more competition because we know that more competition will bring stabilizing prices, will bring more choice for consumers, and will make sure that, over time, Mr. Speaker, Canadians will win on that. We are committed at every step of the way to fight for Canadians, and I know that the Conservative will vote against that, Mr. Speaker, but we'll fight for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener South, Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, as we mark the beginning of Pride season, it is a time to celebrate the 2SLGBTQ+ community and reflect on their accomplishments. However, we know that the rise of hate directed toward this community has made many feel unsafe. Could the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth update the House on our government's efforts to create a safer and more inclusive Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Women and Gender Equality.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for her advocacy. As we raised the Pride flag a couple of days ago, I announced $1.5 million to offset security costs for Pride festivals right across the country. It isn't the kind of announcement I ever want to make, but the queer community feels directly what security agencies tell us. Hate is on the rise. The community asked for help, and we responded. At a time when we're seeing less support for queer communities, our government will never waver. On this side of the House, we support Canadians, no matter who they are, for being their authentic selves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, who's Randy? The Minister of Employment has a 50% stake in a PPE company embroiled in allegations of fraud. Text messages from the COO reveal that a partner named Randy was involved in one of those shady business deals. The minister assures us it's not him, yet somehow he's unable to identify who the other Randy is amongst a handful of employees. So again, who's Randy?
Here. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, of course, Canada has among the toughest, most stringent ethics and conflict of interest provisions in the world for public office holders. The minister in question appeared yesterday before committee for 1 hour and answered all of those questions.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, there is no trace of this Randy. Global News can't find him. The COO claims there is this Randy, but conveniently has forgotten his last name, and the minister can't identify him among a handful of employees. This is a farce. Everyone knows who Randy is. Will the minister just stand up and admit it's him?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The honourable government house leader. Order. 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 The honourable government house leader.
I'll remind it in French. Canada has one of the strictest ethical and conflict of interest codes in the world for public office holders, and this minister answered for an hour to all of these questions, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
The NDP Liberal minister from Edmonton wants Canadians to think that he's not breaking the law, but he was cashing checks from a company that was lobbying his government, and a company that he owns 50% of was winning government contracts using his name. As a minister, he's not allowed to do either. Now, in a Global News report this week, text messages reveal someone named Randy at his company was part of a $500,000 fraud. The minister said it wasn't him, it was the other Randy. Of course it was. So, who is the other Randy, and what's his last name?
I just have to be careful in using the proper names of individuals in the chamber. The honourable government house leader.
Speaker, I, of course, just answered that question, so I would invite the member to move on.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Well, Speaker, we have the same suspicion as the Speaker does that, in fact, there is perhaps some concern about using the member's name. But while the government house leader wants to hide his member, we're just going to run through a scenario here. What are the chances that the other Randy is just the minister from Edmonton in a rubber nose and a stick-on mustache? I'd say about 100%. Broke the Conflict of Interest Act, broke the Lobbying Act, broke the Criminal Code. We want to know, will the real Randy please stand up?
Please stand.
Now, you know I'm stuck in the middle of this one. The honourable government house leader.
Monsieur le Président, bien sûr que...
Mr. Speaker, of course.
That's enough. The honourable government house leader.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that. That is beneath the dignity of this place, where we presume all members are honourable. The member in question spent an hour at committee yesterday answering questions from that member and other members, and of course, I know that the member will continue to ask those questions. I will give the same answer. We have a very strict code of conflict of interest and ethics in this country, and all ministers are expected to comply with that.
The honourable member for Terrebonne. The Auditor General yesterday confirmed what we've suspected for months. She tabled 3 reports with the same damning conclusion. The Liberals have completely lost control of the government machine. Contracts without calls for tender and without justification, payments made to companies before they had even delivered anything, funding for ineligible projects. There is absolutely no oversight of spending, and that brings us back to the question we've been asking for months. Whilst the Liberals are trying to govern Quebec and the provinces for them, who is governing the federal government? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank my colleague for giving me the opportunity to thank the Auditor General once again for her important work on this file and on a number of other files. We heard the Auditor General yesterday putting forward similar conclusions to the ones published by the government a year ago. Given all this information, we have been acting for the past years to put an end to tendering for Mackenzie. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. The McKinsey case reveals a decadent culture at the federal level. The Auditor General confirms that one of the $200 million in contracts awarded to McKinsey, that of the $200 million, 71% were awarded without a call for tenders, 58% were awarded without oversight. For 24% of the contracts audited, the federal government did not even know whether the work had been done. This is scandalous. The report makes only one recommendation, that is that all federal organizations identify cases of conflict of interest, whether real or apparent. Will the government finally do it for real? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Auditor General's recommendations are very similar and sometimes identical to those that were already published over the past few months. Important work has been done over the past year on the issues that my colleague has raised. What's important to note as well is that not only will we continue to do the work, but it's important to do so to ensure the integrity of all procurement process. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, another report from the Auditor General and another Liberal scandal. This time it has to do with the Green Fund. We learn that 196 times the administrators gave themselves subsidies. $123 million were inappropriately paid out. About half should never have been paid out in the first place. There's only one way to make the situation clear. Does the Minister agree with our proposal to have having an RCMP investigation? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. We have no lessons to learn from the Conservatives, that's for sure. We're very clear, Mr. Speaker. The second there were allegations made, we started our own investigations through Raymond Chabot, through McCarthy Thetro. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this is an independent arm's-length organisation that was created by Parliament 20 years ago. But following allegations, we suspended funding. The head of the board of directors resigned. The head resigned. And now we have a new governance model, and the activities will be transferred. Mr. Speaker, we'll have the highest levels of governance, and it's exactly what we'll do. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in this very report, a senior official says that there is an absolute incompetence at the Liberal government, and that it is at the level of the sponsorship scandal. On the 11th of November, the whistleblower said, and I quote, the Minister said a number of times that he had not been informed of the results put forward by on the 27th of August. But no, he lied to the Ethics Committee. Who should we believe, the whistleblower or the Minister? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. The Conservatives know full well we have nothing to learn from them. We started the investigation, Mr. Speaker, through an independent organisation, and this was started 20 years ago. Canadians at home are reasonable. They know that a responsible government starts investigations and acts on the conclusions, and that is exactly what we did. And that what we're proposing to Canadians is a new governance model within the National Research Council to continue to work to help our SMEs and to continue to fight against climate change and to continue to make our country progress.
Member for Brantford Brant. Mr. Speaker, the AG's report proves again this Prime Minister is not worth the cost or corruption. The report reveals massive corruption at the Green Slush Fund, highlighting the misappropriation of $76 million through 90 cases of conflict of interest. Their directors sat at a table, awarded millions of dollars to their friends and to their own business interests, all the while more and more Canadians are hungry and homeless. Right. The question is simple. What plan does the minister have to get that money back?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative are so allergic to good news that they go to old news, Mr. Speaker. The big news today is 4.75. That's the number that all Canadians will remember. That is the number because because we have good economic news. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to answer the same question again. What is a responsible government? It's about lynching and inquiry. That's what we did, Mr. Speaker. And on the basis of the findings, Mr. Speaker, we suspended the funding to the organization. The CEO and the chair resigned, Mr. Speaker. And now we're proposing a new governance model, one with the National Research Council, because we want to restore funding to small and medium-sized businesses in this country, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Mr. Speaker, water is essential for Indigenous communities. It's life. It's sacred. Before 2015, the Conservative government refused to listen to First Nations. At the time, there were 105 long-term drinking water advisories. Can the Minister for Indigenous Services update us on the government's efforts to protect water and invest in infrastructure for our Indigenous communities? The Honourable Minister. Thank you to the member for Pontiac for her work on access to drinking water. In 2015, the Liberal government completely changed the paternalistic approach of Stephen Harper. We now listen to and work closely with Indigenous leaders. Our investment has allowed us to eliminate 144 drinking water advisories. We've also tabled a clean water bill for First Nations so that we'll never go back to where we were before. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
The Auditor General's report proves that this Prime Minister is not worth the cost and the corruption. Most of the government's $200 million in contracts with their friends at McKinsey broke the rules. Liberals are tight with McKinsey. The former ambassador to China and head of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Panel came from McKinsey. The policy director to the former Minister of Public Services and Procurement was also McKinsey. This government serves McKinsey consultants and scandalizes Canadians. Why did Liberals repeatedly break the rules to benefit their friends at McKinsey?
The Honourable Minister of Public Service and Procurement.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Speaker, I've also responded to this question. One question we haven't got an answer to is why are the Conservatives not sharing today's great economic news? The first reduction in interest rates in the past 4 years and the first in G7 countries, and that is not only because we have been responsible budgetarily, but because Canada in 2025, inaudible for the interpreter, investments in dental care, investments in healthcare and childcare, especially throughout Canada, and investments in home building.
For Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, it's no surprise that Liberal minister will do everything to avoid talking about even mentioning McKinsey in the response. Minister, this question is about McKinsey. This company supercharged the opioid crisis, advised totalitarian regimes, held a corporate retreat down the road from a concentration camp. This company has a vile track record, and yet Liberals have constantly turned to this company, supercharging McKinsey's profits, and Liberals have turned to McKinsey to make critical decisions about this country's future. Now that they've finally been caught by the Auditor General, will this NDP Liberal government finally ban this vile company from government contracts? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Public Service and Procurement.
It may indeed be that our colleague was distracted when I spoke about the matter many times during question period. I'm happy to repeat the same answer to the same question, which is the fact that we thank the Auditor General for her report. Her report contains recommendations and views that have been understood and heard in many other reports in the previous months. We have acted on those recommendations for more than a year now. There's nothing more to add except that today is an important day for Canadians and their economy. They don't seem to care. The first time in 4 years that there is a fall in the interest rate and the first decrease across 47 countries.
The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this government, it's not worth the cost nor the corruption. The Auditor General told us yesterday that the government awarded 70% of its contracts directly to McKinsey without a call for tenders, with the help of the Bloc Québécois. This is blatantly unethical and irresponsible. It's thinly veiled corruption. It's a real scandal, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, why is the Prime Minister handing out so many contracts to McKinsey without a call for tenders? Why? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very clearly, people aren't listening across the way because I've responded to this question many times. The problem in listening because a couple of days ago, I heard the leader of the Conservatives tell Quebecers that the Canada dental care system simply didn't exist when there are 2,000 seniors in Lévis-Lotbinière who have already registered to this apparently inexistent program. And there's a high percentage of dental experts that have already signed up to the program.
Mr. Speaker, the opportunities for Indigenous tourism are unlimited. In spectacular Northwest Territories, people have come to experience the unparalleled Northern Lights and our Northern hospitality. Last November, we launched the first stream of Indigenous Tourism Fund, which currently supports over 150 projects. At least 50% of the tourism growth program will be invested in Indigenous tourism attractions. Can the Minister of Tourism tell us how our government is supporting reconciliation through infrastructure investments and Indigenous tourism? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his question. Indigenous tourism is a pillar of our government's tourist growth strategy, and Canada has the potential to become a leader in the world when it comes to authentic Indigenous tourism. That is why NACA will be delivering a new funding to support large scale-up Indigenous tourism project. It will enable Indigenous communities to scale up their projects and grow their own economy. While Conservatives have always looked down on Indigenous communities, we will continue to support Indigenous tourism growth through Indigenous-led process.
The Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, air passengers who've been grossly mistreated by the big airlines are having to wait years to have their complaints heard. The backlog of complaints, right now it's over 70,000. And we just learned of a couple from British Columbia who finally got compensation only to have Air Canada turn around and sue them. The Liberals promised the strongest air passenger protections in the world, but the reality is the new rules make it easier for the airlines to sue their customers. Strongest in the world, Mr. Speaker? What world is this minister on?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians work very hard to save some money, to travel, to go see their loved ones, to take some well-deserved vacations. That's why they deserve a good service from the airline companies. The Conservatives didn't do anything at all until we came here and we put rules in place, and the airlines have to do better, Mr. Speaker, way much better.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, it's World Environment Day, and I'm so honored that in Ottawa, visiting this next few days, are British Columbians who work night and day to protect our southern resident killer whale population, and yet this government makes decision after decision after decision that further threatens the survival. There are only 75 whales left in the Salish seas of this population. The approval of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, even building the Trans Mountain Pipeline, increasing the risk of spills with the certainty of increased noise, doubling the Roberts Bank port in Vancouver with over the objections of scientists who told this government it would threaten the survival of the southern resident killer whales. Does the government understand the goal is to protect, not exterminate?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to reiterate a happy World Environment Day to the member from Saanich Gulf Islands, to all Greens, to Liberals, to NDPs, to Bloc Québécois, Mr. Speaker. Unfortunately, the Conservatives continue to deny the existence of climate change altogether, but just last year, our government announced important measures to help this country continue to lead the way in the fight against climate change. We published draft methane regulations to support cleaner energy. We introduced the world's first ever cap on oil and gas emissions, Mr. Speaker. We finalized our new EV availability standard to increase the supply of ZEVs across the country, and we committed to working with all stakeholders to deliver on a clean, green economy of the future.
Let me do a couple of introductions. We do have a couple of honourable visitors with us today. I wish to draw the attention of members of the presence of the gallery, Mr. Salvatore I'll do this correctly, Quitano, and Mr. Juan Carlos Salazar, representing the International Civil Aviation as Council President and Secretary General, respectively. would also like to draw the attention of members to the President of the Gallery of the Honourable Barb Ramsey, Minister of Social Development and Seniors for the province of Prince Edward Island. And the Honourable Lisa Dempster, Minister of Labrador Affairs and Minister responsible for Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Now we have a point of order from the Honourable Member for Kings Hands.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order with the support of the whips and host leaders of all the recognized parties in this place, just to recognize a really important event that took place outside of these four walls last week. And that was the annual Members of Parliament versus Pages soccer game that has taken place. And Mr. Speaker, it is important to let the record show that despite a variety of different capacities and ages of the MPs, we were able to eke out a very strong 5-3 win against the Pages, and I want the record to show that. But, Mr. Speaker, we're 2 weeks out from our summer break, and I think I speak...
That's not a point of order, but I also just after we said congratulations to the Pages for a great job of singing "O Canada," it's a shame we have to say that we have to say that they lost at soccer. I mean, really, I think the honourable member should apologize for that. The honourable member of Kings Hands.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to wrap up just by saying thank you to our Pages and everyone who was involved. And I know we can't table objects, but we do have something that we will be presenting to the Pages outside of this place.
Okay. Give an inch. You give an inch. It being 15:20 or 3:20, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the amendment of Mr. Lawrence to the motion and concur in the 19th report of the Standing Committee on Finance. Calling the members.